Travis,
What's up, dude?
how you doing?
I'm back at home. I miss you. We saw each other at the conference. It was fun, and now I'm in my old routine again.
Well, I'm not in my old routine. I'm still traveling. We're in Yakima, Washington on our way home,
It's just not
seeing some
fair.
family here. Yeah,
Not
well,
fair.
I wish I was home. I've been gone like 6 weeks. I don't, as an adult, Travis, I don't think I've ever been away from home for more than this trip. My
Oh
wife and
wow.
I were gone for a long time, 6 weeks, maybe seven. I don't
Hmm.
know. But I thought I've never been away from home that long. So it's been interesting. I'm anxious to get home.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, I've just been doing my routine. I am teaching at our church on the Reformation. Sunday. This coming Sunday is Reformation Sunday,
Yeah.
so we're going to be looking at how it started and all of that. And I'm every year I pick a figure from the Reformation and I introduce that person to the church.
Well, that's
So I'm
great.
think I'm thinking I'm doing John Knox this year. So I got this great book, Jane Dawson's work on John Knox.
Wow.
So I just started
Good.
reading. I should be done by Friday, hopefully. So
Protestants being taught church history. What a shocking thing.
yeah. Now, unfortunately, it's church history on the Reformation,
Yeah.
and some Protestants believe that Jesus died in 1400, and then the apostles died in 1450, and then there's Martin Luther. So
That's right. That's right. That's Protestant. Uh, Revelation happened, and then Martin Luther. That's
yeah.
church history for Protestants. Yeah, it's pretty sad. Um, Well, welcome everybody. This is Travis and Ross to Notes On. This is the show where we try to do Christ on purpose, and anything that Travis and I get a hold of that we want to talk about, we talk about. And today we're going to continue what we started a couple of weeks ago when we were talking. I think that the title of the show, Travis, was "Truth is Not for the Faint of Heart."
No, no, it's
And
not.
and it's not. And we talked about it in general, but today I thought it would be cool to talk about it from as Christians when we're trying to do some of the most important work that we can do, and that is to discern what the truth of the doctrine is that we believe as followers of Jesus
Mm,
Christ. Um, there's so many sources out there. Let's take a really basic question like, how are we saved? How do we come into God's good graces, both in this life and the next life? And somebody says, I want to know the answer to this question. So I have a little list here that I made, and to me, Travis, this is a really serious issue. We don't take our doctrine, we don't take church teaching, we don't take our salvation seriously enough.
mm,
This is our eternal soul at stake here, for that particular question. And I want to encourage people to always continue to study.
right.
Never be entirely content with the answers that you have. We can be assured of our salvation. We can be assured of who Jesus Christ is. There's a few things that we know, certainly, but it's just the way I think about this is I always want to listen to the other side, and I always want to, just be struggling with it. It just seems to me to be the safest way. So
Right.
I thought the first thing we should do is probably the one that's the least mentioned or most, I think, underappreciated, and that is simply to pray about it. The very first step we should do is be talking to God and say, I really want to be on the side of your truth.
Sure.
I want to do it with all humility. I don't want to make assumptions about what's true. I'm asking you, humbly asking you, giving you permission to lead me in the direction that you want me to go to figure this out, whatever this is.
Right.
What
I
do you
agree.
think?
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, James 1 tells us that if we ask for wisdom, God will grant us that wisdom. And this is a spiritual matter. It's not merely an issue of philosophy or the intellect.
that's right.
And Paul also warns us against being those who are always learning but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. And I do sometimes feel, and I see this on both sides, I wonder if when you're getting in the middle of these debates on God's existence, going back and forth, I sometimes wonder if this is not more of a game than an actual pursuit of the truth. And when you turn philosophy into a kind of fun hobby that really makes no genuine impact on the way you live your life, that's when the pursuit of philosophy becomes vanity.
I used to have a friend, Travis, who kind of took that attitude. He was not a believer, and tragically, he's since passed away. But he was just very good at espousing, every position on any particular subject. And I would say, well, what do you believe? What do you think on this? And he just
Yeah.
wouldn't. You couldn't ever pin him down. It was like he really wanted to be seen, or maybe he wanted to see himself as someone who was open and honest and trying to consider all options. But we don't live forever, and
Yeah.
he slipped and fell in his shower when he was in his 40s and died. And I thought, I wonder if he ever came to a decision on this stuff. It's I think you're really right. I think it's easy to just keep studying and never have to make a commitment, but our lives are finite, and get to it.
It's interesting that people assume that if our lives were just longer, then that would give us a better chance of believing. And I don't know if that assumption is all that safe. The time of the earth where there was the least amount of faith was the pre-Diluvian civilization when lives were much longer.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go through life thinking you have plenty of time, it's amazing how quickly that time runs out. That's why we're always exhorted in Scripture to seek the Lord now. Today is the day of salvation. Now, do this now. Don't wait, because if you do, there's a resistance buildup that happens where you become even more and more cynical and less likely to believe. I'm only speaking from a human point of view, of course, but it's just a warning that we all have to take into account.
Yeah. Yep. And I think it's all what you said is already disproven, and here it is. I think I heard this, and everybody's going to look this up and tell me I'm wrong, but I think I heard that the average lifespan just in the year 1900 was like in the late 30s, right? And so our lifespan has increased. It's like doubled since then, and we're no better off for it.
I don't know if you're right about that. I do know that in the Middle Ages, the average lifespan was 40.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and it doesn't really start to rise until the 19th century. So, and all of that had to do with nutrition and things like that. I mean, have you ever gone to Washington, D.C. and gone into the congressional building?
Yes.
Have you noticed how small that thing is?
Yeah.
It looks so big on TV, and the chairs are real small. That's because these people were little.
Yeah.
We've grown by leaps and bounds since they were on the earth. And I mean, the average Roman soldier was 5'8", but the average knight, if I remember correctly, was something like 5'3" or 5'4".
I was in South Korea once at a museum, and they had this room with all this really fierce battle armor, and things you could throw at the opponent and stuff you could wear to protect yourself, and they had it all propped up like people were wearing it, and I looked at it and I studied it for a while, and then I started to laugh because I realized it was like for hobbits.
Yeah.
This stuff was made for people that were like 4'10" or 5 feet tall.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, William Wallace was not that tall by our standards, but he was huge because I think he was like 6'2".
Yeah. Wow.
Well, if your average knight is 5'4", well, then I mean he's a foot taller than these people, and so he had that big sword, and Mel Gibson wanted to be William Wallace, but Mel Gibson's only like 5'8", so he didn't really do William Wallace justice. But that big sword that he had in the film,
Yeah.
that was true to form. I mean, William Wallace actually had that huge Ramphal sword, and he would just wield it like this, and he would just chop off heads, and he'd spin around and just wield it as they were rushing up to him. He was just knocking off the heads of these English knights. I mean, he was bad to the bone. But the reason he had that advantage, he was just so huge. And so in the movie, you'll hear Mel Gibson's character portrayal of William Wallace. Somebody says, "You're too short." He goes, "I know William Wallace is supposed to be like 7 feet tall and fire shoots out of his eyes, you know." So, I mean, that's an allusion to the fact that he really was much taller than Mel Gibson made him out to be. I don't know, I got all off on that track, but I mean, it was nutrition. They lacked nutrition that shortened their lifespans tremendously.
Yeah, that's right. So back to the topic, I think after we've prayed, I think probably even before we read the Bible, which is going to be the next one, I think, how do we say this? Really coming to terms with our own pride and arrogance, an idea that we can figure this stuff out on our own,
Mm-hmm.
and really trying to put as best we can put a sword through that and realize that, you know, minds much more brilliant than us have been working on this stuff for 2,000 years, and that there's a lot of disagreement on it.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to, you know, it's like that scene in Ecclesiastes 5, you know, when we go before God. It's one of my favorite passages in the Bible, you know, the throne room and God on the throne and all the angels. And it's like I'm barely crawling in on my face, you know,
Right.
and asking for a little bit of attention or repentance or love or whatever it is. And I think that's kind of the attitude we have to take here. We
Sure.
trivialize this stuff, and you know, God is holy and to be feared. We don't like to talk about that side, but you know, we need to take this really, really seriously when we do this stuff. And I
Sure.
think a spirit of humility is even that should be part of our prayer. Lord, show me how I'm prideful in ways that I don't even see.
Sure. All right, cool. All right. I'm sorry, I got a text from a student and it distracted me.
Oh, that's okay.
And I apologize. Would you like to know kind of how I walk my high school students through this?
Yes.
I mean, I have a mixed breed of high school students, not mixed breed in terms of they're not different animals, although I sometimes wonder if they're human, but there's just a large swath of perspectives. And I give them my standard of truth. I define truth, I define knowledge, and I give them my standard. By what standard do we judge a worldview to be true and a worldview to be false? Well, truth is what corresponds to reality, and knowledge is justified true belief.
Good.
So it is a positive cognitive attitude about a certain thing or proposition, and if you believe it, have that positive cognitive attitude, and if that belief corresponds to reality, and if there's good solid evidence for that belief, then you have knowledge. And if your knowledge claim lacks any one of those components, then it's not knowledge. So you can't say people in the Middle Ages knew that the earth was flat. First of all, they didn't believe that the earth was flat because most of them realized the earth was round. But then people might say, well, they knew that the sun goes around the earth. Well, they didn't know that because it's not true. The earth goes around the sun. And so they believed it. That was their opinion, but it was false.
Right.
Well, they thought that they knew it. So what? They thought that they knew it. Yes, they had an opinion, but they didn't have knowledge. So knowledge, in order to be knowledge, has to be true. So after I define what knowledge is and what truth is, the standard of truth is what I call incontrovertibilism. If you come across a worldview which has core truth claims that are self-defeating, then that worldview is false.
Automatically.
Automatically false. And if you come across a worldview that has core truth claims that are insufficient, then that worldview is false insofar as it is not a sufficient worldview. And I'll illustrate that in just a second. If you come across a worldview that has core claims that are undeniable, then that worldview is true. And you can have an undeniably true or incontrovertible worldview in several ways. For example, you could have one that is what I would call existentially undeniable. This is Norman Geisler's apologetic. So if you have a worldview and the core claim is necessarily inferred from ideas or statements that are literally undeniable or analytically true, then that worldview must be true. Okay, so pantheism, for example, is self-defeating directly because, or at least indirectly, because if I say I am God and everything is God, then you're really saying that there is no such thing as a finite self.
Right.
Or a changing self. Well, all I have to do at that point is ask the pantheist, when did you realize that you were God? And the moment he gives an answer, he's just disproven his worldview. Because the process of coming to realize something is change. And
Yes.
so you've proven that you've changed by coming to realize that you're God.
That's
Okay.
good.
Polytheism, for example, is insufficient. There's nothing self-defeating about saying, I am God. There is something self-defeating about saying everything is God. There's nothing self-defeating about saying Zeus is God. And so you may very well have multiple gods. And yet each one of those gods are a product of this universe. Okay. Now, if they're a product of this universe, then you still have to ask the question, well, where did the universe come from? And your logically possible answers are the universe is eternal and necessary, in which case pantheism is true, which, by the way, we've already eliminated. Say that the universe is eternal and contingent, which means it's just a brute fact. It's just there, and that's all. And that's the atheistic perspective. Or you could say that the universe is either created or at least dependent upon an uncaused cause, which is the theistic position. Now, showing that polytheism depends on one of those worldviews is not to establish any one of those worldviews, but you've at least eliminated polytheism as a sufficient worldview, because those gods are either manifestations of the one, pantheism, or they are super creatures like the aliens in Star Trek. Okay, so Star Trek actually has, atheism actually has a belief in many gods. Some of the earliest atheists were polytheists. Mm-hmm. They just said that those gods are made up of matter. And, so that's why Kirk, which is, Star Trek is an atheistic mythology. Kirk can get in the Starship Enterprise and fly out into space and encounter Apollo. One of the episodes of the classic series, Kirk meets Apollo.
That's right.
Right. So there's nothing inconsistent about saying that the gods exist in an atheistic worldview. Okay. So you can be an atheistic polytheist and just say that these are super creatures made of matter. If you are an atheist and if you're a materialist, and not all atheists are materialists, but most of them in the West are, you could say that, well, these gods just exist as super creatures. Or you could say that there are these super creatures that exist in the theistic universe, and we call those angels. So polytheism fits into any one of those worldviews, but polytheism can't exist in and of itself as just a worldview. Okay. So even though I list polytheism as a possibly true worldview, when we analyze it, it's insufficient.
Because
If we're
there's
going to
no
look for it,
beginning.
yeah,
Yeah.
we have to look for a worldview that actually makes sense of polytheism. So what if Thor were to land outside of my building right now that I'm in, and I were to look out my window and see him with his hammer and all that? Well, I would be awe-inspired. I would say, wow, that's cool, that's amazing, but I wouldn't change my worldview. I wouldn't become a polytheist because I would know that as awesome as Thor is, he is contingent. He is a finite being, and therefore he is dependent upon this universe for his existence.
Travis, are the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Genesis, the Pentateuch, are they the only holy books in all the religions of the world that have an account for the beginning, for creation?
There are allusions to a creation out of nothing in some pagan traditions, but the Hebrews were the only ones that articulated it, gave a very detailed narrative of the creation, and sustained that throughout their history. The Egyptians, for example, said that the gods spoke the universe. The Ra, the great God, spoke the universe into being out of nothing. But then he goes on to say he spoke himself into being. So you have self-creation
Yeah.
mixed in with some of these pagan versions of creatio ex nihilo. So, and that's self-defeating to say that something creates itself. So, yeah, the Hebrews are the only ones that consistently maintained it is the short answer. Now, I don't think that you can prove that the universe had an absolute beginning through any rational argument. You can give evidence for it, which is very probabilistic. And so the scientific evidence we now have is very encouraging. But yeah, as you know, tomorrow they could overturn the Big Bang Theory and we would have to just look for another model. But what Aquinas did is he says, okay, I'm going to forego that discussion and I'm just going to argue that God exists on the assumption that the universe has always existed. And I think that that's the best first step. And then we can worry about whether, because it's still a kind of creatio ex nihilo. God is uniting, to use Thomistic language, esse and existence. He's uniting that together, and that takes an all-powerful being, because you are, in a sense, by creating a form, bringing it into existence out of nothing. And as Gavin Kerr, who's been on our show, says in his book on creation, what we should stop doing is looking at creation as a kind of, God has got his finger and he pushes a domino and they all start falling afterwards. That's how a lot of people think of God and creation. Sure. He just kind of gets the ball rolling. But this is a far more robustly metaphysical explanation of how things exist or why things exist. God, from eternity, unites esse with essence, and thereby creates the universe. And therefore, in terms of God's own perspective, creation and preservation are one and the same act. From our perspective, they're two distinct acts. The universe begins to exist and then is sustained in existence by the power of God.
Good. That's a really good background. Thank you.
Well, I've learned, and so when we finally eliminate all the worldviews and we're down to theism and we're asking the question, does God exist? I do say to my students, I think that one of the things that you can do is pray. And they say, my atheistic students will say, well, I don't believe in God though. And I'm like, well, if God does exist, then God is perfectly aware of that.
Yeah, that's right.
He knows you're not hiding that fact from him.
Right.
So, but you can pray, I don't know if you exist, God. And I certainly don't believe in you, but if you do exist, please reveal yourself to me through my searching of this evidence, through my reading of the scriptures. You should go to the mosque, the synagogue, and the church and ask which expression of monotheism is plausible. And while you're talking to the rabbi, the imam, the pastor, the priest, and so on, you should ask, well, what is your evidence for God's existence in the first place, wholly apart from the revelation? In other words, you should go in houses of worship and talk to people that, they think about this a lot. This is their living. Don't just sit in your room and ruminate over this. Go out and interact with people.
And Travis, that's really big. It's further down on my list, but let's talk about it. When we discuss theology and who God is, evidence is just as important as it is in the hard sciences.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's more than just revelation, either in the Bible or personally. Evidence is huge. And what you and I are followers of Hugh Ross and apologetics in general. And the hard philosophical and scientific evidence for God's existence, for the existence of truth, for the God of the Bible, for Jesus and his resurrection and his offer of salvation is as sound as it is, like you were talking about, the Big Bang or other scientific premises that we believe. And we cannot ignore that.
No. I mean, I would always press the evidence on the unbeliever. I can say other things to believers and comfort them with the truths given in Scripture, but to the unbeliever, if I'm talking to somebody that says, I don't think God exists, I don't quote the Bible to them. I talk to them about evidence.
Right.
I will say, do you think that you're a contingent being? What's that? And I talk to them about that. Or I'll say, do you think that the Big Bang Theory is true? Well, if you think that that's true, then you're looking at an absolute origin of the universe. So where did the universe come from?
Right.
How did the universe come into being from nothing? And the atheist might say, well, how did God make the universe? Well, neither of us know, whether you're talking about the atheist who doesn't know how the universe came into being from nothing, and the theist who doesn't know what mechanism did God use to make the universe. We're both in an I don't know state there.
Right.
But I do have a being that exists that brought the universe into existence, even if I don't know how he did it. You have absolutely nothing for which there is no even potential for the universe to exist.
Right.
And so I'm not merely saying that the problem with you is that you don't give me the how. You can't, in principle, give me a rational answer, because what you're saying is irrational. It is absurd to say that there was absolutely nothing and then poof, something began. And I don't care about what poofed into existence, whether it's a grain of sand or a universe. Anything and everything is such that it's impossible for it to come into existence without a cause.
I think I have a good argument against something from nothing. I say, before the Big Bang, or before there was anything, there was nothing, including not even the potential for something.
Right.
Because if there was the potential for something, then it wasn't nothing. There was something
That's
there.
right.
And if there's no potential for anything, then nothing can come from it. It's a real misunderstanding of what the word nothing means.
Yeah. I was giving out, I don't know if you got a hold of the thing that I was passing out at the conference, but my defense of classical theism. Did you see that?
I have it in my briefcase and I haven't read it yet, but yes.
Haven't read all of it? Disappointed in you.
No.
Well, when I defend the idea that something exists, and the things that we know that exist are contingent, that they are finite, changing, they are dependent on other things for their existence. And one of the things that I point out in the opening pages of one of the appendices where I defend these premises, as I say, what's paradoxical is that nothingness is impossible to conceive.
Right.
You can't think of nothing, because even when you think of nothing, you're thinking of something. And that inability to conceive it is actually proof that something does exist. Although, even though it's impossible to conceive, it's actually quite easy to define. It's very easy to define nothing. It's the complete and total absence of anything whatsoever. Whether you're talking about minds, energy, time, space, potentiality, whatever. On the other hand, being or existence is impossible to define, but very easy to conceive. Any definition you give me of existence, like some people say, well, existence is whatever is. But you're begging the question at that point. You're just giving me a tautology.
It's a circular argument.
Yeah, it's a circular definition, which really
Yeah.
gets us nowhere. I mean, it's it's so intuitively embedded in who we are. We just know that being is, that it's impossible to define. It's almost like asking me to define the word tree. I can only do it ostensibly, just like pointing at things. Like there's a
Right.
tree,
That's
there's
right.
a tree. But I can't like define it. I can say, well, it's a plant consisting of bark and leaves and so forth. But then you're going to say, well, what's a plant? At some point, I'm going to get down to brass tacks and say, well, there. Same thing with existence. I can point existences out to you, like you and me and whatever, but I can't define it. I can conceive it, but I can't define it. With nothingness, I can't conceive it, but I can define it. And so that's an interesting paradox when you're getting to brass tacks and you're talking about metaphysics on this level. So,
Yeah, that's
again,
great.
truth ain't for the faint-hearted.
We're at 31 minutes already, Travis.
That was fun.
What the heck? This is great because I got like 8 other categories here. So I guess we're going to pick this up, keep going with this next week.
Yeah. Let's keep doing it, man.
Yeah, this is good. There's a lot of.
It's always good seeing you, my brother.
You too, buddy. I missed you. I hardly got to see you for like 2 days and you were gone. And now we got to wait again. So
Yeah.
I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Take care, man.
Love you, man.
Bye.